So it's a pleasure to have you join us for this luncheon and discussion. And those that I haven't met and those that I have, I'm Dr. Jim Saeed. Who's never heard me lecture before? Good. We did this for years in Southern Oregon, and it's so delightful to get back to it and share this information with people that are desirous to know about healing. One brief comment, excuse me. When mention was made about Dr. Esselstyn, have you heard of him before? Carl B. Esselstyn Jr.? He wrote a book called Prevent Reverse Heart Disease. And he made a movie that was featuring him and Dr. Collins, and T. Collins Campbell was his name. And both of them were doing research, he on heart disease and Dr. Campbell on cancer. And they came up with the same conclusion about how to treat both using a plant-based diet. So they were featured in a movie called Forks Over Knives. Has anyone ever seen that documentary? Great. So we watched that documentary when it first came out, and I read his book. And after every lecture, we actually showed that movie throughout all of Southern Oregon for 4 months. And after every showing, 3 of us would show up, 3 doctors, to answer questions for an hour and a half after every showing. And it was a lot of fun. And people really got into understanding what it meant to cure heart disease and cancer using means that they had access to themselves. And there was such a hue and cry for Dr. Esselstyn to come out there that we called him up. He came out to Southern Oregon and spoke to a record crowd at what was called the Criterion Theater, which is the largest theater in Southern Oregon. 775 seats. It was sold out 2 weeks in advance. The theater said, don't do this to us again. They had so many calls, they didn't know what to do with them all. So when Dr. Esselstyn showed up, he said, where's Medford? He's used to teaching in large cities. So he lectured the next day at the hospital and changed the scope of cardiology for the next 10 years. And then that group of cardiologists left and the rest didn't follow through. But many of us have. So I got to spend a lot of time with Dr. Esselstyn. He and his wife were both there. My wife and his wife hit it off. They're both vegan chefs. We had a great dinner. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But his work was groundbreaking. He showed that it's possible to reverse heart disease, not just stop it in its tracks or slow it down, but reverse it. And I've seen this in many cases over the years since all of that work. And that was around 2011. And so we have a lot of experience with that kind of work. But what I want to do today is introduce you to the concept of healing and health. Now this is going to be interactive. You can actually talk and chew at the same time as far as I'm concerned. But if you have questions, let me know. This is totally interactive. This is not a one-way street. I need feedback and I look forward to your questions a lot. Okay? Is that fair? Good. So by way of background, I was first an engineer in mechanical engineering and product design and bioengineering out of Stanford way back in the turn of the century, late 60s. And I then went on to medical school in naturopathic medicine and chiropractic. And I was allowed to go to any medical school I wanted in the world. And I said, no. I choose to go where I'm not going to have to do drugs or major surgery. That's not my calling. I want to understand healing. And the reason is, in 1970, 71, I graduated Stanford. I went in the Army. It was Nixon invited me into the lottery. So I thanked him in my own way and did my stint in the Army. And when I was in the Army, I became a vegetarian because I was starting to study about health. I was very sickly as a kid because I was allergic to all kinds of things that no one knew about. And so I was fed all of those foods and I was sick all the time. My gut didn't work. I had tonsillitis all the time, earaches all the time, in pain, and it stunted my growth, I'm sure. I willed myself to 5'8". Gravity has been winning ever since. can you do? So I started studying about healing. I wanted to recover. So I started studying the work of what are called the natural hygienists back at the turn of the century, 19th century, or 20th century in the 1900s. And it made sense to me. And so I started studying a great deal about what is healing, not just what is normal, abnormal, what's disease, what's not disease, but what's healing. So my question to you first is this. What is disease? You tell me. And what is health? Those are the contrasts that we typically talk about in this culture. What's disease? Pardon? Death. It leads to that. So does life, by the way. But disease is an accumulation of signs and symptoms that may or may not have a name. I can keep it very simple. Symptoms is something you know about. Signs is something someone can tell about you. You do a blood test, you have all kinds of signs. Cholesterol, calcium, nitrogen levels, etc. Symptoms is something you can tell about to someone else. I have pain, I have tingling, I have nausea, etc. These are symptoms you have yourself. Disease is a constellation of signs and symptoms that constitute something with a name or not. I don't like name diagnoses, by the way. I don't like diagnostic medicine because it's very limiting. You say someone has something itis, that means that part of the body is inflamed. Tonsillitis, nephritis, hepatitis. Itis just means it's inflamed. Osis means it's been going on for a long time. Syndrome means it's been even longer. So you can come up with the name of something called an itis, an osis, or a syndrome, and you've got diagnostic medicine pretty well covered. So I studied all that in medical school, but then I began to appreciate a different way of looking at the body. Not from a disease perspective, but from a health perspective. Totally different view. Now here's my next question. What is health? Homeostasis, which means state of balance. It's a good start. Pardon? That's how most people describe it. So if you're missing something, like disease, it means you're healthy. I wish it worked that way. But that's a start. You don't have something with a name, other than aging. We all contend with that. So, any other descriptions of health? So people call it the absence of disease, the absence of symptoms and signs. That's a start. But if you don't have something, does that mean you do have something? No. So health is defined as wellness, something that's increasing energy, increasing state of well-being, increasing state of balance in the body, and that's a physiologic process. I call it optimization. So I want to describe something to you. Let me show you where disease comes from. You ever heard of a bell-shaped curve? Okay? Also called the Gaussian distribution in physics. It's also called the normal distribution. Have you ever heard the term normal before? What does normal mean? Help me with this one. It means you're not sick, okay? Absence of signs and symptoms. Now, a normal distribution defines a whole population. So if you take, for example, serum cholesterol, actually that's a bad one because they skew it. Serum calcium, anything. Or you take height and weight, and you do an averaging of the entire population for an age. You get a bell-shaped curve. If you go to the middle of it, you take the average, called the mean. Half are on one side, half are on the other side. In statistics, if you go what are called 2 standard deviations from the mean, just a statistical evaluation. If you're 2 standard deviations from the mean, you are encompassing 95% of the population. You know what they call that group? Normal. That's what normal is, technically. So normal is 95% of the curve. So if you're normal, it means you're as sick as 95% of the population. That's all normal means technically. If you're abnormal, it means you're on either side by 2.5%, too high or too low. That's called abnormal. So I have to tell you, when we look at labs, you've had lab work done, and you go to the doctor and the doctor looks at your lab work, how long does that take? a nanosecond or more, not much more. So you look at labs, and the labs will give you all the normals, and abnormal will have something as low or high, and it puts it in bold. So the doctor looks at the labs, says, well, you're normal, except a few things are low or high, and I've done this with my patients routinely. I said, I'm going to look at your information as a medical doctor and as a naturopathic doctor. I've studied both. As a medical doctor, it takes me about 30 seconds. I could do a 5-minute consultation and have everything covered. And they said, yep, that's exactly what they did. So I said, this is normal, this is low, this is high. This is a little more high than I like to see it. You'll take this drug, I'll see you in 6 months. They said, that's just what they told me. I said, I know, I get that. That's how medicine is done. You come up with a diagnosis, you come up with a treatment, and that's the end of it. You check someone out in 6 months. Instead, what I look at is this. I look at a much finer range we call optimal. Can you see that? I can't. Optimal is a much finer range of functionality. We work to optimize physiology. That's moving toward higher states of wellness or health. So instead of looking at all lows and highs, we look at all the normals also. And the normals are in strange ranges. They're subclinically high or subclinically low. We look at that whole picture, and the whole point is to understand what's actually going on in the body. Why is it functioning the way it's functioning? How is it off? What has to be supported to support organ systems that are starting to show signs of deterioration, signs of degradation, signs of weakness? Does that make sense? Then you work to bring those systems back to optimal function. So work to optimize my patient's health. Now, let's go further. What I want to look at with you is the process by which we get sick and the process by which we heal. Then we'll look at how. I'm going to look at two things with you. I'm going to look at efficiency of function over time. So here's time, and here's efficiency of function. You start out at some level, wherever. Let's just take an arbitrary place of starting. So today, you're at some level of functionality. Arbitrary. From that state, you're going to improve or degrade. You can't stay where you are. You ever tried? You keep having life happen. So, at that state from where you are, the body is going to go through a phase that we call a flow state, where you feel okay. When a patient comes in, how are you doing? I'm fine. And I say, okay, how are you really doing? I say, I don't ask that question lightly. And so they start describing what's going on, and many patients are in a state of degradation. But they get to a critical junction, we all do this, where all at once you get much better, or all at once you get much worse. I'll give you an example. If you're eating what I call the standard American diet, SAD, the SAD diet, have you all heard that term? I hope by now. So you're eating, you can be a vegan, by the way, on Hostess Twinkies and beer, which I don't recommend, by the way. So you can eat garbage. I'll leave it at that for now. We'll talk about what garbage looks like in a moment. Or you can eat a very good diet. You can not exercise at all and be a couch potato while you're exercising your thumb, right, on the controller, they call it. Or you can be exercising routinely, like Fran and Arla were talking about, Arland. And you can be kicking the dog and yelling at your family, or you can be kind and gentle in your heart and showing them the love of God. You can be sleeping, or you can be staying up forever. You can be resting, or you can get no rest whatsoever and worry. You ever had worry be an issue? You don't have to raise your hand, but we all do, okay? We'll talk about that later, and the physiology of worry and anxiety and all of that. So you can be going through these processes in life, And if you're eating well and exercising and getting rest and sleep, and your heart is kind, and you're doing things that you know are supportive of health, you're getting fresh air, you're getting sunlight when it's here, then what happens is you all at once take a jump in your health. If you're eating the standard American diet and you're getting no exercise, and you're not getting sleep, and you're not getting rest, and you wake up exhausted, and you crawl through the day, you're going to reach another critical junction all at once, get worse in your health. You ever had that happen? You wake up and you go, what happened? I feel so bad today. I haven't felt this bad ever. Or have you ever had it the other happen where you wake up and you go, I feel fantastic. Like when I work out, for example. I work with many bodybuilders. These guys are amazing. They're consistent with what they do. And if you work out or you exercise, you start out and you condition, and you feel like you can't get anywhere. Nothing's happening for 6 weeks. And then all at once, your strength goes up, your stamina goes up, you go, what happened? I feel great. And you continue that process, and you get these steady increases of strength and stamina all at once. That's an uptick in this process. It's a jump in health. Now, whether you go up or down, then you start another process of being okay at that level. You're functional. But then what happens is you accumulate garbage of necessity. Every cell in your body is a garbage collector and garbage dumper. As you metabolize anything in your body, oxygen, water, food, nutrition, metabolites of all kinds, hormones, etc., you're accumulating garbage to eventually dump out of the system. As you accumulate that garbage, you become encumbered by it, and you don't feel as great. This, by the way, will always happen. I have patients say, how come I can't just get better all at once? I said, I wish you could. But the process is one of slowly building up health. But the slow building up of health is down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. That's the process of healing. So all at once, you again feel much better, or all at once much worse, depending on the style of life you lived when you were in this flow and degrading state of accumulating garbage. If you were eating properly and exercising and getting oxygen and fresh air and sunlight and being kind in your heart, then you're going to have an increase of health. If you don't, you're going to have a decrease in health all at once. Are you following? Okay. Now, what do you think is going to happen if you never eat properly, if you never exercise, if you never touch another person with the love of God, if you don't get enough sleep, if you worry constantly about everything, what do you think is going to happen over time? Which way is it going to go? Pardon? That's right. It's going to go abrupt, abrupt, abrupt. Where's that going to lead? Death, disease, degradation, all the D words. That's what I call them. If you're eating properly and you're exercising and you're getting oxygen and fresh air and you're getting sunlight and you are kind in your heart and you're wanting to demonstrate to the world God's love, which way do you think you're going to go? Up. That's exactly what happens. This process is called healing or wellness, increasing states of efficiency of energy, of functionality. That's what I want for my patients. Is that what you want for yourself?
No.
Amen. Now, this, by the way, is a law. Are you familiar with that? This is a law. A Nobel Prize was given for this in 1977 to a doctor by the name of Ilya Prigogine, a physicist. He wrote a book called Order Out of Chaos, demonstrating his work. He got the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1977. I met him at his office in Brussels, Belgium in the mid-90s because we were taking his research and applying it to healing. He didn't know that. So I met with him for an hour in his office in Belgium, and we were discussing his research. I had read his book. I studied his work. We were applying it to the health world. We applied it with Hans Selye's work, which we'll get to next. And he was asking me questions. I thought, what's wrong with this picture? He called our discussion the philosophy of biology. He had never encountered anybody doing work with his research in the world of healing. It was really cool. But he appreciated how the law can be established in our bodies because our bodies are organizing over time. He had never applied it that way. He had always applied it to other physical systems, like slime molds and galaxies. They all follow the same pattern. It's a law. A law describes how something works consistently. So this isn't just an interesting thought. It describes a law of how we get sick and a law of how we heal. Do you follow? All right? So let's look at what happens in this process. If something doesn't make sense, please let me know. Fair? Good. That's a good point. Did you catch that? So what's it like for a person who's in that flow state? Remember that state of evenness before you go into accumulation of garbage, before you reach that critical junction to go up or down. So when you're in what we'll call the flow state, you go, I'm doing fine. I have no reason to do anything else other than what I'm doing. It's working. Well, it's working, but is it working the direction you want it to go? So where did you come from? Were you at a lower state or higher state before that? Most people felt better, worse, a little better, worse, a little better, worse, but each worse was worse than the previous worse, and each better was not as good as the previous better. But in the upward swing, each better is better than the previous better, each worse is not as bad as the previous worse. Did you catch that? You're going this way, not this way. Okay. This, by the way, is my wife, Rhonda.
Hello.
I love her questions.
Psychologically, when they're in that I'm okay mode, some people tell themselves a lie that, oh, well, I can have my ice cream now, or I can, eat right before I go to bed, or I can eat junk because they feel okay for a while. Is that the determining factor of whether they go up or down, how they psychologically reward themselves when they feel good? Or are they having a sense of, well, I don't have any pain, so I don't have a motivation to change anything?
That's a great question. So let me respond to it this way. Here's how most people live. And I say this because I've seen it thousands of times in practice over the decades. I've been in practice 46 years, and I'm not that old. And so I see this routinely, time and time and time again. I anticipate this with almost every patient, unless they have cancer. If they're scared enough, then they will behave themselves. Most of the time, not all the time. And then they die if they don't. I'll look at that in a moment with you. So what Rhonda's saying is, here you are in a state of flow, and you go, I'm just fine. I have no reason to do anything different. And then they go through this state of accumulating garbage, and then all at once, they drop. And then they go, oh no, something's wrong. So there's two thresholds that get people's attention. The lower threshold, what do you think is the great motivator to want to improve? Pain and what else? Pardon? Fear, thank you. So pain and fear. These are the two motivators I see routinely where someone says, I better do something now. I hurt too much, I'm debilitated, I'm afraid I'm going to get a disease or I'm going to get worse and I can't afford to do that. I don't want to do that. That's the motivation. You ever had that motivation? We all have that motivation. Then what happens is they start, okay, I'm going to start the process of recovery. And they reach an upper limit. What's that limit called? Pardon? Courage? Not yet. I call it complacency. Complacency. I feel good enough. I haven't felt this good in years. I love what I'm feeling. I feel fantastic.
Do you know what I find is we are used to who we are. and that we don't know we don't feel well. We think we feel well, but we don't know we feel well. Or let me put it this way. My son has a head injury. He doesn't realize he has a head injury.
Right.
Okay? So he lives with it thinking we're all nuts, thinking that he has the head injury because he doesn't feel that way.
Right.
I know for myself, I'm going to tell you I feel just fine, but do I? I don't know. Do I? If I've lived like this for years, and that's my normal state,
Right.
but there has to be something better.
So you address a very critical point here. So I agree. If you don't have a sense of need, you're not going to do anything to fulfill a need. If you don't have a need for health, for wellness, or for healing, you're not going to pursue that. So in my practice, I have a very self-selected crowd of patients. I have great patients because they realize they have a need, and they pursue that vigorously to improve their health. But if there's no sense of need, what's the point? There's no motivation. So if you're not experiencing any pain or fear about where you are, and you're okay with where you are, and you're complacent with where you are, that's where you stay. So what I find happen is this. So I have people that start here, and then they go to a state of complacency. What happens, they say, I feel great. I'm going to reward myself. I'm going to have just one bowl of ice cream, one glass of beer. I'm going to go out and just have pizza with the family, or whatever your reward is. I don't know. I'm going to go have steak at the local steakhouse. And they start a process. Where do you think that's going to go? They go back to their old habits, and they go down to the same. They go, oh no. I hear from them, a year to 5 years later, they go, doctor, I need help. I go, I know. Let me tell you what you did. And it confirms it. They start the process again. And I have many patients who do this over their life. All right? What's the limit to that? Pardon? That's for sure. Time is definitely the limit. You're going to run out of time.
So how do we get motivated that we say, I want quality of life when I'm aging, and I want energy when I'm aging? I mean, is that possible that time doesn't necessarily pull you down to weakness or decrepancy as you get older?
That's the question brought up here as well. That's a great question. So what happens is this. Is it possible to break past this layer of complacency? No question. If we hold to a higher standard than complacency itself would accommodate, then yes. So if we aspire to a greater state of wellness, then we go past this point of complacency. Now, does it take effort? It takes effort to change the habit of where you've been that you're complacent about. So, for example, the comment was made at the presentation, which I loved, by the way. They were introduced to Esselstyn's diet, which is 100% plant-based diet, and he took all the patients he worked with that he wrote 2 studies on and published them in peer-reviewed papers. The first was done with 20 people, the second was done with 200. He proved the reversal of heart disease in all cases, in every case that followed the protocol. But they were all called terminal cardiac patients, meaning they were all sent home to die. They weren't responding to the medications or the procedures or the surgeries or the drugs that they were given. They weren't responding at all. They were told, get your affairs in order and you're going to go home and get ready to die. That's all cardiology could offer them. He took on only those patients. Can you imagine a study of taking only terminal cardiac patients? That was what he was testing. They all improved. They all reversed their heart disease. They didn't go to cancer. They had long, vibrant lives after that process. But they were motivated. And his was virtually oil-free. He could have maybe a nut or two, but not much more oils, no oils at all.
So sometimes I guess I believe that, or know, that the motivation isn't just a bowl of ice cream or a salad, but it's also emotional and internal damage that's also going to cause you
to make that choice,
No question.
right? So you have to heal that in order to make the correct choice. I
That's
mean,
a superb point. I appreciate that thoroughly, clinically. I do a lot of counseling in my practice for just that issue. What is it in us that drives us to do things that we don't want to do, or know better than to do, or will take us down, but we don't even know it? So physician first means teacher. And I take that role seriously. So I teach my patients about health and healing, what it really means on many, many levels, including how we make choices and where they come from. So we have patterns in us that are driven epigenetically, not just genetically. All right, genetically is hardwired in our body, and it determines the efficiency of our physiology. Epigenetically is the emotional overlay, if you will, on our genome that drives us familially. What are the things we pattern ourselves after in terms of how we were raised and the generations back? That have become belief structures that we just adopt as our own without thinking, are they legitimate? They're just part of us. So those are renegotiated. So if your choice is, I really want to go to a drug or alcohol or Hostess Twinkies or ice cream or beer, excuse me, the question is, what's going on behind that choice? Whereas other choices can be made that are healthy choices. But what I find is this. When people don't make healthy choices, they don't understand what the choices are to make. That's a key. So I do testing with my patients to have their own bodies demonstrate what the choices need to look like for their health. Then they're not arguing with me or their background, they're arguing with their own body. And when they have hard data, clear data, describing a path with understanding of what's behind that path, what I find is classically people comply with that because they want to do what supports their body. And the bottom line is we take out all the pro-inflammatory triggers. That's the key. Inflammation is a process behind every pathology, including cancer. It's the itis, the osis, the long-term, short-term inflammation. We take out all the pro-inflammatory triggers out of the diet, out of the lifestyle. That's a short answer to your question. Your question is a very deep question. I respect where it can go. But I'm going to take a short answer right now, if I may. Yeah, but I respect the question a lot. So, in fact, it has a lot to do with where this can go, what's possible. I'll give you an example. I'm allergic to sugar. And I've been allergic all my life to sugar. Any sugar, my body just goes crazy. It takes me months to recover. And Dad used to put sugar in my milk thinking it would give me energy. And I was allergic to the milk also. So I was sick constantly. So when I found out I was allergic to sugar, I did a test on myself, and I found out, nope, sugar doesn't work for me. I went into depression for 3 days. I thought, what is life without sugar? Then I realized, well, it can't be any worse than what I'm going through now. So I'm going to try it. I cut myself off of all sugar, all dairy, the things I was reactive to in my body, gluten, eggs, soybeans, but black beans and things like that. When I tested myself, I thought, all right, get with the program. 3 days of feeling bad for myself is enough. Time to start feeling good about my own body and getting my health back. So I shifted my course and never looked back. Now, I went to my cousin's wedding years back, and he had a gluten-free vegan cake for his wedding. I was so excited that I ate it without asking, what's the sugar? Bad idea. It took me 3 months to recover. Okay? I thought, good experience, bad idea. So I learned, but I don't tolerate it. So I always ask, how is something sweetened? And do I miss the sugar? Not really. It doesn't even taste that good to me anymore. But I appreciate the taste of real food. But over years, that's what's happened to my own taste buds. That's my experience. My motivation was, I don't want to go back into pain, and complacency doesn't work for me, so I want to improve my health. So we all have an edge that we have to overcome somewhere. How do we do that? For my patients, what I do is called education. We evaluate what's going on, so there's clear black and white understanding of what's going on in the body, and then we make changes accordingly. And when a person can see what's actually going on from their own body in black and white hard data, they go, oh, and they get with the program. I've done this with 2-year-olds. I talk to them as my patient. The parents are there, but I talk to the 2-year-old because they're the patient. One of the worst cases I ever saw of eczema was a 2-year-old. I did a testing on him, and we did allergy evaluations and food hypersensitivities. There were like 4 foods he could eat. It was the worst case I ever saw. So we tailored the diet. The parents followed it through. When the child was confronted with foods he knew he couldn't tolerate, he says, Mom, I don't tolerate that food. A 2-year-old. He got it because he was in misery. He knew something had to happen and not stay there. In 3 weeks, the eczema completely cleared up. 3 weeks. The body's incredibly forgiving. I really get how we get sick. And over the course of this series, we'll talk about how that works. But what I don't understand is how we heal. I just call that God. Honestly, when I started the process of healing, I go, how is this possible? I'm in awe every single day with every single patient with recovery. We just support the process and help them cooperate with God, and He does the work of healing. To His honor and His glory, not mine or anyone else's. That's how I view healing. And I view it that way, not just from a theological perspective, but from a clinical perspective in my experience over years. Healing to me is just a miracle. Continual. Yes.
I want to know, excuse me, you were talking about sugar. You're talking about processed sugar, not sugar from fruit. Like if you ate a pear or grapes or what, are you allergic to that sugar that's in the...
No. So here's the distinction. Thank you for that clarification. The sugar I'm referring to is processed sugars, refined sugars. Now, alcohol is the most refined sugar. So that includes alcohol. Jams, jellies, and fruit juices are actually metabolized in the liver the same as alcohol. So I don't include those as legitimate sugars. But fresh fruit, whole fruit, no problem. No problem. Now, most people do well with a moderate amount of fruit at a meal. What I tell them is how much you can hold in your fist, palm down. Not palm up, palm down. That's usually enough sugar at a meal, at the beginning of the meal ideally. So it goes through the stomach quickly, so it doesn't stay in the stomach too long and ferment, turn to gas and alcohol, and you get bloated and drunk on your dessert. I mean, literally. So eat your dessert first. If you have fruits, at the beginning of the meal, a fistful, palm down. You can put it with leafy greens, no problem, like in salads or green smoothies, because the greens go through the stomach quickly, and it's not going to ferment. Okay? Gas is a big problem. Gas below the lower esophageal sphincter can cause GERD, or gastroesophageal reflux disorder. Heartburn. You ever had heartburn? That's gas below the stomach, or small intestine, that's pushing up on that sphincter, causing it to open, allowing contents of the stomach to actually push back up to the esophagus into the mouth. So what do they give you? Proton pump inhibitors, right? PPIs are called, omeprazole, etc. Pepsid, to sequester the excess acid. The problem is typically not enough acid, not enough hydrochloric acid in the stomach. So you can't fully digest the proteins. So they ferment, they putrefy and turn to gas. Or the sugars ferment because you keep too much sugar in there too long, it turns to gas. That pushes up, causing heartburn or GERD. We work with that a lot.
The blue wellness curve, is it asymptotic to something? Does it flatten out at some point, or does it go vertical?
There's no asymptote. There's no upper limit. So this has no limit. So the question I have to that question is, how much love is too much? Is it possible to have too much of God? No. So there's no limit to that. And that's a profound state of experience. How many of us yearn for that and strive for that? Gratitude's a big part of it. Amen. So now we're talking about a lifestyle that's truly conducive to a deep healing, profound healing. So we're in a state of flow in our life about the foods we eat. We'll talk a little bit about that today. We're getting the exercise we need on a regular basis. Every bodybuilder I've ever met, the one word they always tell me is consistency. Doesn't matter what you do it consistently. We're getting fresh air, we're getting sunlight, we're breathing, crucial. You've heard of nitric oxide, right? That keeps the vascularity resilient. It's a gas. We get it from leafy greens, but you have to chew them. This is why Esselstyn's work was so profound. Leafy greens, lots of leafy greens. The nitrites in the leafy greens, when they're chewed, not just guzzled down in a juice, but chewed, mix up with enzymes and bacteria in the crypts of our tongue. Think about how we're made. You have bacteria in the crypts of your tongue that mix up with those nitrates to convert them into nitric oxide and an acid stomach. Also, when you breathe through your nose, you generate nitric oxide that goes into the vascular system as well. So nose breathing and eating your greens, chewing your greens are crucial. In fact, I read a medical study trying to find a way to generate nitric oxide. You know what the conclusion of that published medical study was? Chew your greens. They could find no drug to make up for that. So if we're chewing our greens, we're eating properly, we're getting exercise, sunlight, and fresh air, and we're getting good, restful sleep, especially the hours before midnight, 9, 10 o'clock. Those hours are much more restful than the hours after midnight. And also, the hours between 10 and 2 is when the glial lymphatics are working. You know what the glial lymphatics are? In the brain. Your brain detoxifies. It's got its own lymphatic drainage system that detoxifies your brain. Throughout the day, your brain's got nursemaid cells, I call them, glial cells, that clean up the synapse, or the junction between neurons. So your neurotransmitters are generating information through your neurons, and they have to be cleaned up. They clean up through the glial lymphatics, or the glial cells. At night, between 10 and 2, those glial cells, called astrocytes, squeeze by 60% and squeeze out their garbage. And their garbage is collected by the glial lymphatics and taken through the lymph system to the blood system to the liver for detoxification. So your brain can function the next day. That only works if you are sleeping between 10 and 2. Then between 2 and 6, cortisol has to go up to reduce inflammation from the previous day's stress, so you're ready for the next day with high cortisol. We'll look at those patterns also specifically. The way the body is designed is just mind-bogglingly beautiful. So if we're doing this, and we're sleeping and getting rest, and our attention is toward not putting foods in that are pro-inflammatory, but only taking things in that are supportive of health and healing, and our focus is on the Lord. That's how I put it in my life. So that I'm here to express God's love. Who most to? Who do I want to have God's love shown to the most? No takers? To my wife, the one who's with me all the time. Pardon? To my wife. That's who I want to show the love of God to the most. And I'm serious. If I can't show it my wife, then I'm a hypocrite. If I show it to the world and they say, what a nice guy, but I can't show that to my wife, all our kids are gone, our grandkids are, we go see them periodically. But if I can't show it to the one with whom I'm all the time, I'm a hypocrite. So that's my yearning and my desire. So if my life can be lived according to God's laws and His character, then this process of wellness is possible. Because my life is in accordance with the laws He's written, morally and physically, in nature. Then we don't know what's possible. That's the beauty of the wellness curve. There's no asymptote. The asymptote is complacency, but that's not the wellness asymptote. That's what we create. You know what asymptote is? That's a peak level of a curve. It doesn't go anywhere past that. Marlon's an engineer, so I respect it. So we think differently. But there is no upper limit of wellness. It's infinite. Great question. Amen. So let me go back to Esselstyn for a moment. So he was having people eat no fats, no oils, lots of greens every meal. He was telling a story to me one time. He said he was monitoring a patient and watching their LDL cholesterol. That was the bottom line of the efficacy of his work. And if the LDL cholesterol was staying low, like at the level of around 50, then he knew that they were on track. They'd recover. He watched one patient of his go up to like 60, 70, 80. He said, "What'd you do?" He said, "Well, I read a book." "Oh no, bad idea." The book was on the Mediterranean diet. But I'll just try it. So he added olive oil. What do you think happened? He couldn't metabolize it. I have about 40% of my practice that cannot metabolize oil genetically. So when they take in oils, they accumulate LDL cholesterol. And that cholesterol then will oxidize. The LDL is not the issue. The oxidized LDL is the issue. Have you ever heard of hardening of the veins? Hardening of the veins. That's not a trick question. What hardens? Arteries or veins? Arteries. Why? What do you find in arteries you don't find in veins? Oxygen. Oxygen. Your heart's pumping blood to the pulmonary tree to gain oxygen into the blood, then it's pumping back from the pulmonary tree out to the rest of the body. And the arteries carry that oxygen to every cell of your body. Veins accumulate everything back without oxygen. But when LDL cholesterol is elevated and you're getting oxidized LDL in the vascular system by eating too many fats and oils, you're causing these LDL cholesterol molecules, I call them fat boats. They're designed to carry fats from the liver to the cell. So you fill up these fats boats with too much fat, they dump too much fat along the way, and they create what are called fatty streaks inside the artery that then oxidize because it's oxygen rich. The oxidized LDLs go inside the artery wall, creating what are called foam cells that other parts of the immune system attack, and then form a breach in the barrier of the vascular lining to eventually create a blowout and a hemorrhage. So the body plugs that up with an inflammatory process to create scar tissue. Are you following? To plug up that artery that becomes plaque. But the problem is inflammation. Inflammation and oxidation of too many fats and oils. So I tell my patients with elevated LDLs, fats and oils have to come down. If they're not a terminal cardiac patient, I say no more than a tablespoon of fats and oils at a meal, all totaled, which is nuts, seeds, nut butters, seed butters, and oils and avocados. Half an avocado or a tablespoon total of all other fats and oils. What can you fit on a tablespoon? That's it for the meal. And I watch their LDLs come down. Like Fran was saying, LDLs will start to drop. When you get the high greens in the diet, you also support the LDLs coming down and nitric oxide going up, which then allows the vascular system to become more resilient. So now you start reducing plaques and increasing vascular integrity, and the heart disease starts to reverse. As my wife says, weight classically starts to drop. We know that because we have health retreats at our ranch we've done for 18 years. We see patients come out there, they're put immediately on a 100% raw vegan diet. We're talking hardcore. And we exercise them, we put them through all kinds of detoxing processes, and they start losing a pound a day. Their weight starts to strip off that needs to. The cholesterol levels start to balance themselves out, usually within about 3 weeks. So there are changes. After 3 days, they stop getting hungry. They're fine with 2 meals a day, and they start getting their lives back. We've seen miracle after miracle happen. So let me go further. Inflammation, a big deal. So let's look at what happens. What's inflammation? Pardon? Pain. It leads to pain, no question. That's a great one-word descriptor. Inflammation is a process, pardon? Swelling is a component of inflammation. So inflammation is a process of the body trying to recover. It's the body's process of attempting to heal. Any problem in the system is accompanied with inflammation. If you tap your shoulder, your elbow, against a door jamb, it's going to inflame. If you stub your toe, it's going to inflame. If you slip and fall on ice, your hip's going to inflame, or your back, whatever you hit. If you get a sliver, it's going to inflame. If you cut your finger, it's going to inflame. If you eat a bad diet, your stomach and small intestine are going to inflame. So is your colon. If you insist on sugar, you're going to trigger inflammation. If you get an infection, you're going to inflame. Viruses, bacteria, fungi, parasites, etc. Cancer is a disease of inflammation. Inflammation accompanies every pathology we know and every body process we know of recovery. Why? When inflammation occurs, the body pools fluid to an area that's rich in chemistry and the immune system. So the body brings to bear what it requires to repair an area and eat up something that doesn't belong there, an infected material. So when you bring all that to bear in an inflamed area, it's going to swell. It's going to get redder from the blood being brought into the area. It's going to get hotter because of the blood being brought in. So it's red, hot, swollen, and it's going to be painful because the area distends. It's not designed to be so filled with fluid. But inside that fluid are several things. One of the most important is called fibrinogen. You ever heard of that one? What does fibrinogen make? Harlan? It makes fibrin. Fibrin is scar tissue. So you have fibrinogen that makes fibrin, which is scar tissue. Pardon? Anything that triggers inflammation. The cause of scar tissue is inflammation. That's simple. Now, suppose you're eating foods that cause inflammation in the vascular system. Pardon? For example, red meat, arachidonic acid, is pro-inflammatory fatty acid. You see it in eggs and dairy, and fish and fowl, and red meats. We have it in our bodies. We're filled with it, but we're not cannibals, so we're not eating it. We'll go first. Wow. So, but anything that's pro-inflammatory we take in, our body's going to inflame. Now, when that happens in the vascular system, people think about cholesterol as being the dominant problem. You heard of the cholesterol theory, right? Eat too much cholesterol or too many fats, you're going to cause hardening of the arteries. There's a book written and published fairly recently called The Clot Thickens by Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. It's a great book. I highly encourage it. It's written pretty simply. The Clot Thickens. Dr. Malcolm Kendrick out of Scotland. And it's written almost tongue-in-cheek. It's just a fun book to read. But it's a very serious book on researching the last 150 years of research on heart disease. You know what he proved? That the cholesterol theory is wrong. The biggest issue is inflammation, leading to heart disease. Heart disease is a disease of inflammation. And he showed what happens in an inflammatory area where scar tissue starts to form. Platelets are brought in, which are really stick in the vascular system. Red blood cells are brought in to stick an area to plug it up so it doesn't blow out and create a hemorrhage. The red blood cells carry cholesterol. That's where it's coming from, not so much from the diet. But if the diet's oversaturated and you can't metabolize it properly, we reduce the oils and fats in the diet. So I said about 40% of my patients have that genetically. But the problem is first and foremost an inflammatory process. So you have to take out all the pro-inflammatory triggers from the diet. Does that make sense? What's the most pro-inflammatory food you can eat? Sugar, refined carbs, the most pro-inflammatory. The first question I ask my patients, do you eat sugar? You know what everyone tells me? Just a little. They know where I'm going. I go, I've heard anything you can tell me I've heard. Let's talk. So we start describing why sugar is such an issue. There's over 200 downside effects categorized and research about refined sugars. Just say no. Simplest way I know to put that. If it's in stuff, don't go there. Anything ending with ose, fructose, sucrose, galactose, maltose, dextrose, leading to comatose. Okay? Bad joke, but it works. You get it. That's where it's going to go. Also, sucrose, your refined, artificial sweeteners don't work. They're damaging on the liver and the brain, and they're pro-inflammatory. Your date sugar, white sugar, brown sugar, blue sugar, green sugar, wherever it comes from, rice syrup, sucanat, these are strong concentrated sugars. They don't work for your body. The sweeteners that I find best tolerated are stevia and monk fruit, or lohan guo. Monk fruit and stevia. They don't raise the sugar levels and they're not pro-inflammatory for most people. I have a couple of patients that are reactive to stevia, but that's rare. They know when they eat it, they don't feel well. It's obvious to them. But stevia and monk fruit are the two that don't drive sugar levels up. They're not contributing to inflammation. So those sweeteners do okay. Monk fruit is made accessible, minimally refined, but they often put it with erythritol. Erythritol is a sugar alcohol, and some people don't tolerate the erythritol. It makes their tummy upset. So if you eat the monk fruit and it's got erythritol and your tummy gets upset, don't bother with the erythritol. But straight monk fruit is very expensive. So people get it with erythritol, they buy it at Costco, and they tolerate it generally quite well. But if not, go to straight monk fruit. Now, the question is about maple syrup. So I tolerate some maple syrup myself. That's the one sugar I can do in small amounts if it's high quality and really dark, mineralized. Honey is more high fructose, so you have to be careful with honey. In my body, I know it because I just don't tolerate those things. Some people might tolerate smaller amounts, but I don't. You have to test for your own self. But if sugar is a problem or yeast is an issue, which is commonly a problem, then honey is also a trigger. If any infection is there, just don't do sugars at all.
Can you talk about agave?
Thank you. Agave is just like high fructose corn sweeteners. Just say no to agave. Yeah, I heard some groans. It's huge level of fructose. It's like high fructose corn syrup. Not much of a difference technically. Go ahead.
What about, what's the other one called? It's coconut palm nectar.
Okay.
Most people, it's very low sugar. I know it's only 5 grams per teaspoon.
So coconut palm nectar is one that some people can tolerate. I personally don't, but others can. My wife does, for example. So if you tolerate maple syrup reasonably well, you probably can tolerate coconut palm nectar. It's highly mineralized, so it's not just straight sugar, but it's still sweet. And so many people do okay with that. Some don't. I'm one of the people that doesn't. My wife has used it. She likes the taste. Like caramel, she says. So, but I just want to have you understand that inflammation from foods. Now, pro-inflammatory foods, the ones I see most common, beyond sugar and refined carbs, white flour products, white rice products. White rice, you take the hull off, you polish the rice, it's just sugar. The sugar index is very, very high. White pastas, white flour pastas, same problem. For many people, gluten is a problem. Now, gluten is kind of a troubling word. Well, for some people. Some people have celiac disease, they don't tolerate gluten at all. Many people have non-celiac gluten enteropathy, it's called. That's me, my wife as well, many of our kids. Where if they take gluten, they feel terrible. It's hard on their gut, they get foggy-headed. I've had many patients stop gluten and their brain clears up. I just got an email this morning from a patient of mine who had AFib. We got her off the gluten, the AFib resolved. She went to her cardiologist, they couldn't believe it. So she didn't have to continue seeing cardiology. I just got the email literally this morning. So Some people do not tolerate gluten, so just be attentive to that. Other pro-inflammatory foods. For many people, red meat. We're not designed to eat them, creatures. It takes an immense amount of energy to digest. It takes a lot longer than 4 hours to digest it. For some people, up to 12 hours. If you look at a carnivore compared to an herbivore, a carnivore has very distinctive features. One of them is they have claws and very sharp canines that are a lot stronger than our teeth. They're designed to take food in, but they don't chew. They bite and gulp. But their gut tube is very short, and the hydrochloric acid levels are several times higher than ours. So they're designed to take in flesh food, not cooked. You don't see a bunch of holes barbecuing. They take it in whole. They gulp it all at once. They get it through the gut tube quickly. Otherwise, it would putrefy, and they become auto-intoxicated, poisoned. So it's a short gut tube to get out of the body fast. And they also don't respire. They pant to manage respiration. So their physiology is very different than an herbivore or so-called omnivore. They call us omnivores, but we're not. Our teeth are designed for not biting and gulping, but for what? Chewing. We have molars. Our incisors and our canines will bite, but we're going to bite an apple. We're not going to bite through somebody's bones. We're certainly not going to chew them. So we're designed to take in foods out of the garden and grind it down. Now, when we grind, what happens in the mouth? It mixes with saliva, so we adjust the fluidity and viscosity of that food, but we're also mixing up with enzymes. Alpha amylase from the protids to break down starches. There's also lipases to break down fats starting in the mouth, we found out recently. It's amazing how much we're learning about physiology that we didn't know before. When I went to medical school, again about 1,000 years ago, we thought we knew something. I've done many, many courses since then, and every course I found out what we never did know. And it's a constant learning process, which is awesome. I tell my patients often, you guys keep me in school. And they do, which I appreciate. So we grind food down. We're mixing up greens with the bacteria in the crypts of our tongue. So we're mixing food to be able to swallow it down the esophagus. Then it hits what? Teeth, esophagus. Then we hit what? Hit our stomach. In our stomach, what happens? This is ingenious. Pardon? Our stomach is acid, hydrochloric acid. It has other enzymes to break acids down, but it also separates out two different moieties, they're called, starch and protein. So our stomach separates out the starchy components from the protein components and digests down the protein components.
Can you talk about what happens if you eat between meals in your stomach?
I'll come to that. Okay. Well, I'll tell you briefly, and then we'll come to it further. How many love to snack? You don't have to raise your hands. It's self-incriminating, so that's okay. If you snack and you eat between meals, you want 4 hours from the time food hits the stomach till you eliminate food from the small intestines into the colon. Well, as we come to that, you'll see. So that's a 4-hour process. If you eat food in that 4-hour time frame, you interrupt the digestive sequence of the previous meal. You don't finish digesting, especially proteins. Undigested proteins, as we'll see, is what the immune system attacks as a foreign protein. Now you start developing an allergy or food hypersensitivity to that particular food. So snacking is a serious issue to our health. Go ahead. We need a mic.
So if you have stomach issues, though, and have to eat smaller meals and can't eat a big full meal, then what do you do?
So I work with many, many patients like that all the time. They tell me that the same scenario. So we test the foods that a person can actually eat. We tailor the diet so it's not inflaming the gut. We make sure the nutrition is adequate, that the gut can heal and recover. There's certain nutrients and botanicals that do that. As it recovers, that's not an issue. So I respect the issue, but it's not the limitation, with all due respect. So we hit the stomach. It's digesting proteins. It's getting them ready to go where? It goes to a sphincter called the pylorus into the small intestine. First is called the duodenum. Now the duodenum or duodenum, I always heard duodenum. Is it tomato or tomato? I'm not sure. So right here, there are 3 organs. You have a liver, a gallbladder, and pancreas. Those are all involved also with digestion. So the liver is doing a lot of things, but it's also making bile, which is stored in the gallbladder. When fat hits the stomach into the duodenum, you release contents from the gallbladder, bile, to emulsify the fats, to break fats down to smaller and smaller particles so you can digest it across the cell membrane and assimilate it. Pancreas is dumping protein, fat, and carbohydrate enzymes, digesting enzymes, but also dumps in a mammoth amount of sodium bicarbonate. Why? What pH is the stomach, acid or alkaline? It's acid. Is the small intestine acid or alkaline? Alkaline. So how do you alkalinize all this stomach acid? What do you think you use? Sodium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate alkalinizes what comes out of the stomach from the pancreas dumps that, mammoth amounts. So you alkalinize these contents to digest the food in an alkaline environment. Now, that's going to go through the rest of the small intestines and the jejunum and the ileum. You have many feet until it dumps into the what? What valve is here? To the large intestine. The ileocecal, and now the colon, the large intestine, starts from here and allows for elimination through the rectum. So, in the small intestine, you're digesting food. You're breaking things down to very small molecules. Proteins break down to what? Amino acids. Carbs break down to what? Sugars, simple sugars. Fats break down to what? Mono and diglycerides, small molecules. So those are taken across the gut wall. So here's a gut cell. Called an enterocyte or a gut cell. You have villi, which are little fingers that increase the surface area of the gut. If the gut had no villi, your gut would be about 1 square meter of surface area. Do you know how many square meters it is with those villi? About 250 square meters. Okay? So the body makes this mammoth amount of surface area to take in all those nutrients you're breaking down to go across the gut wall, to be taken in between cells and in the cell, to be taken into the vascular system, to be taken over to the liver, to be metabolized, to be taken to the rest of the body. That's what your body's doing every time you eat. Now, what do you think happens if you eat foods that are pro-inflammatory? What do you create? Pardon?
You might want to answer
Scar
that.
tissue.
Then I
Thank you.
have a question.
So what happens is this. If you eat foods that are pro-inflammatory, you cause the gut to inflame. When you cause the gut to inflame, you start breaking down the junctions between these gut cells. And you create what's called a leaky gut. You ever heard of that term? Okay, it leaks. It leaks by allowing nutrients or undigested proteins to come into the vascular system that should never have done that. When they come in, they're uninvited. That's the key. When they come in uninvited, undigested proteins, so here's an amino acid. The body should take in that amino acid directly and it's fine. But if you put chains of them together, because you never completely broke them down or digested them, you can't assimilate that as amino acids. So the body sees this protein structure trying to come into the cell through a leaky gut pattern as you break down these tight junctions. So the tight junctions open up, the villi start to break down, these undigested proteins come in, and the body goes, oh no, a foreign protein. It doesn't belong here. It's like a virus or a bacterium or a fungus. It's a foreign protein. The body doesn't say what it is, it just says it's a foreign protein because it's not an amino acid. What do I do now? What would you do if you were the body? You have an invader, pardon? You have to attack it.
Some people think then they're supposed to have this sodium bicarbonate to change from an acidic stomach to a alkaline
Small intestine.
colon. Then they think they're supposed to take either vinegar or, and they say, well, it's apple cider vinegar, or take soda. And can you talk about the danger of that? Well, how dangerous that
Okay,
is?
I'll look at that briefly with you now. We'll come back to it. So what Rhonda's saying is that if people say, well, I need to take something more alkaline or more acid to help my digestion, they typically take apple cider vinegar or sodas, neither of which are desirable. I did a study on vinegar a couple of years back. I thought, what's the hype about apple cider vinegar? So I started studying it. And I saw that all vinegars are about 6% acetic acid, including apple cider vinegar. And what it does is it causes proteins to rot in the stomach.
It masks the symptom,
So
does
just
it?
say no. Apple cider vinegar causes proteins to rot in the stomach. Many people take it. There's far better ways of handling that. But apple cider vinegar is not going to help. Neither is soda, because you're changing the pH in the stomach and small intestine in the wrong direction. You're trying to interfere with the process the Lord already put together for us. He's just asking us to get out of the way. Cooperate.
What about lemon juice in the morning to get your pH right?
So my wife's talking from experience with many, many patients. So lemon juice in the morning is desirable to help detoxify the system. And it works really well, by the way.
It's your pH, alkaline.
It's alkaline. Now, let's come back to here. So these undigested proteins are getting into the body where they shouldn't be, so the body says, we've got to attack them and neutralize them. So we create what are called antibodies. We have 5 groups of antibodies. That's what they all look like, the chemical structure. And we have immunoglobulins. Heard of those things? Immunoglobulins are antibodies. They have G-A-M-E-N-D, gamed. IgGs, IgA, IgM, IgE, and IgD. They all have different functions in the body. So these antibodies now connect with the structure of the protein. So you have these antibodies connected and attaching now to this protein, tagging it. Once it tags it, it sends a signal, a chemical signal out for other cells to come in to destroy it. So you have this incredible immune response to this particular foreign protein. But how did you get the foreign protein in the first place? You couldn't digest it. You snacked. Your digestive enzymes are weak. You don't have enough acid in the stomach, for example. You're not chewing your food satisfactorily. You're taking foods that take too much energy to break down, like red meats. They're tough on the system. Or eggs or dairy. Very hard to break down. Plus, they have pro-inflammatory fatty acids called arachidonic acid. So you're taking things that are pro-inflammatory naturally. Not desirable. Do you know we're the only race that refuses to wean? Are you aware of that? So we hire a 4-legged wet nurse called a cow, or a goat, or a sheep, or a camel, or a gerbil, I don't know. If you want to get high protein milk, you know what the highest protein milk is found in? Rats, moose, and blue whales. Now, those are not high-end industries to generate milk. You ever tried to milk a moose? Lord help you. A calf, yes, no problem. And those milks are high protein for the young of that particular species. Do you know that humans have the lowest protein in the milk of mamas? Lowest protein of all mammals. We're not designed to grow that fast. We don't need that much protein. Protein is overhyped in this culture. Way overhyped. So we need some, but not the mammoth amounts that the industry of advertising would tell you. That's what happened with soy, by the way. They tried to push that as a vegan alternative to meat. Too much protein. Soy also has other problems. It has enzymes, it has constituents that are that interfere with assimilation of protein, interfere with assimilation of vitamins and minerals, and causes red blood cells to clump, called Rouleau formation, so they can't get through the capillary bed very well. And they're also high in phytoestrogens. So soy is not a food I classically recommend. And some people are truly reactive to it as an allergy or hypersensitivity. But it's got a number of things I don't encourage for people. A little bit on occasion you can tolerate, but by and large, don't make it a staple in the diet. So these antibodies attack, they sequester this, but here's what happens further. These antibodies are now potentiated to search for that protein in the body. They're now surveillance tools. So these antibodies are now found in the vascular system, and they start surveilling the entire body through the vascular system, looking for a protein that looks just like this to get out of the body. Now, what do you think of what happens if it finds a protein that's part of your own tissue that looks just like the protein in that food? It's called an autoimmune condition. One of the most common I contend with is Hashimoto's disease. You ever heard of that one? It's autoimmune thyroiditis. Thyroid gland is being attacked by antibodies that now start converting the thyroid gland to scar tissue because it's inflamed. Harlan, you're going to be my go-to for scarring. So when it inflames, it's going to scar, and now it starts using up functional tissue into scar tissue, converting it, and you start limiting functional tissue. I've seen patients respond adversely to all kinds of tissue structures. I had one patient that was having a bone graft in her jaw. It wouldn't take. She went 3 times to different clinics and surgical groups. It wouldn't take. So they brought her in to see me. I checked her out. She had a bone autoimmunity. Her body was reacting to her own bony structure. We treated her for the autoimmune condition. It resolved. She finally got a successful graft. Autoimmunity is not a problem with the target organ. It's a problem in the immune system. It's an immune issue first. There's ways of protecting target organs and reversing the immune response to heal those things. So it's not a death sentence. You don't have to have it for life. I've seen many, many people recover from many other kinds of autoimmune conditions, including Hashimoto's disease. Microphone? Microphone.
You kind of surprised me there because my understanding was with the Hashimoto's that you just have to live with it.
That's not true.
Okay.
You do not have to just live with Hashimoto's.
Okay.
I have hundreds of cases all over the country right now.
Oh, wow.
And they recover. I've seen many cases completely recover. The antibodies go down to totally normal. But we're treating the immune system. And you're taking the foods out of the body that are pro-inflammatory. One last point. There are 5 foods with Hashimoto's or autoimmunity you should never eat. Gluten, eggs, dairy, soy. What do you think the 5th one is? Sugar. And then we test the rest of the foods against the blood for that person.
How does Hashimoto's occur?
Good question. Snacking. I couldn't resist. Okay? You're causing foods to be undigested. Those proteins undigested are foreign proteins. The body potentiates the foreign proteins, creating a leaky gut. Those antibodies attack it. They get into the bloodstream. They start looking for similar protein structures. It finds them. It happens to be your thyroid gland. Now, the person that did most of that research is Dr. Vojdani in Southern California. He started Immunosciences and Cyrex Labs. Dr. Vojdani, Vojdani, Vojdani. He's a dear friend of mine. He's an immunologist, world-class immunologist. He's about my age, I think a year older. We've both been doing this work a long, long time. We've conferred over the years many times with his research with my patients. Brilliant guy, dear, dear man. Humanitarian, honestly. And he's a guy that did all this research and published it. Others have worked with him. I know them personally also. I've studied with many of those guys, and they've done brilliant work proving this pattern. Get this. He did research showing that building materials cause autoimmunity. He proved it. He got sued, you know by whom? State Farm. Because it was going to cause all kinds of problems for them with people suing building material companies for their autoimmune conditions. State Farm won. Cost $3 million to get through that phase. So instead he had to start another company called Cyrex Labs testing autoimmunity against certain tissue structures, 55 different tissue structures, instead of building material reactive patterns. Okay? But he's really the premier researcher in this world. And his work is replete with this kind of data, showing what actually happens. So I refer you to someone like that just, I've got all of his material work. He sends me his reprints. It's just beautiful research and published in peer-reviewed journals. So are you following so far? So you snack, you start eating food you can't digest, or you snack so you don't digest fully. Your immune system attacks those undigested proteins. You start creating inflammation through the rest of the body. Now, one other key here. Those antibodies always, what is the word I just say? Always crosses the blood-brain barrier. Catch that? Those antibodies always cross the blood-brain barrier. Now, in the brain, here's your brain, artist conception. So in your brain, you have a specialized immune system. That's called the microglial system. That immune system is incredibly reactive. I call them dumb thugs. When I started studying this, I thought, nobody else acts like that, but dumb thugs. When something comes into the brain, they all start just beating everything all at once. It's just random, constant, causing the whole brain to inflame. So if you're eating a food you're reactive to, the body's going to send antibodies to the brain, hunting for that same protein structure to protect the brain. How many brains do you have? One. That's the organ of the mind. You think it's important to keep it intact? All right. Have you ever seen a living brain? Neither have I. I used to dissect brains all the time. I used to teach human dissection and neurology in medical school. And I had never seen a living brain. We went to a conference a few years back at the University of Central Florida. And we did, 100 of us from around the world, neurologists. I'm also trained in functional neurology. We went and studied brain dissection for 3 days. We had 49 brains for 100 of us. And we were dissecting the brains, and it was a teaching hospital. So 2 people died when we were there. They brought their fresh brains to us. I'd never seen a fresh brain before. It blew my mind. You couldn't even hold it in your hand. It would slosh. It would slosh out of your hands. It was highly liquid. We all looked at that. We all had been studying neurology for years. Everyone came away believing in God. There's no way the brain can function the way we know it does and look like that. Everyone came away believing in God. No other force in all creation could have our brains function the way it does and look like that. Blew me away. I'd never seen that before. I really appreciated it. So here's this microglial system causing the whole brain to inflame. So you get foggy-headed. What happens if you eat a heavy meal, like Thanksgiving dinner? What do you want to do right afterwards? Right? Fall asleep. That's when you know I have a recliner for your chair for dinner. I remember watching that as a kid. I thought, why is everybody falling asleep after dinner? I got a kick out of it. But that's a big problem. So if you're eating foods that are pro-inflammatory and that are toxic or that are not fully digested, your brain's going to suffer terribly. And now get this. When your brain suffers, what happens to your mind? You tell me. Pardon? It gets foggy-brained. You can't think clearly. So here's the key to this whole process. This gets my attention more than anything else I've described. If your brain is not healthy, if your brain is toxic, if your brain is inflamed, you can't hear the messages of heaven. You can't hear God's voice. And when you study His Word, it can't go in. So to hear the messages of heaven, you take care. No problem. Who wants to hear the messages of heaven? Who wants to hear God's voice? Amen. It requires a clean brain. Your brain must not be inflamed. No snacking. Get the foods out of the diet that are pro-inflammatory. Get the sleep you require so the brain can actually detoxify at night. Is that important? You want a dirty brain? Dirty brain, foggy mind. Foggy mind, can't hear God's messages from heaven. If we can't hear that, very serious. It's not a message of salvation, it's a message of our relationship with God. We want that relationship to be solid and conscious, sealed in the Lord.
Even when you're eating really nutritious, highly digestible food, if you're eating too much of it, you're going to have digestive problems and clogged up brain, right? So overeating is kind of a problem here in the U.S.
Simple answer, yes. So if you eat more than you can digest, you have a limited capacity of digestion. You distend your stomach, and you end up with gas because you can't finish digesting that food or adequately digest it. It's going to be a similar issue.
Here's a question. As you grow older, I understand that the hydrochloric acid in your stomach reduces its ability, its potency to digest.
And the total amount as well.
As you grow older, is there is it a good idea to take supplements that are for digestion?
Great question. So as we age, brought up at the very beginning of this whole talk, as we age, things start to decrease. Height, skin tone, tone of muscle, bone density, digestive enzyme capacity, all this starts to decrease. So as we start losing hydrochloric acid in the stomach and pancreatic enzymes as well, and small intestinal enzymes, those many times have to be replenished. So I have many of my older patients and some of my younger patients taking digestive enzymes or taking hydrochloric acid, attain HCl, or digestive bitters, which have a similar effect.
Can you speak about the difference between those, the hydrochloric acid and the bitters for digestion versus people who take Tums or Metamucil or things like that?
Okay. I get where you're going. Thank you. So many people will take drugs to alleviate the symptom. Is that desirable? When you alleviate the symptom, when you mask the symptom, have you changed the condition beneath it? No. Okay? So the medical model is based on what?
One symptom, one drug.
It's called allopathy. An MD is called an allopath. An allopath does the opposite. If it goes up, take it down. If it goes too low, take it up. If it's too hot, cool it off. If it's too cold, heat it up. Do the opposite of what the body's doing. So if you have a pain, do the opposite to mitigate the pain, not to deal with the problem that's beneath it. It's a problem. So the focus is to sell drugs. It's a brilliant business model. Because the idea of research is to create a drug that you become dependent upon and have to keep using. That's the business model. The problem is, it doesn't work. It's not about healing, it's about symptom management. So, in something like this, why is this happening? You're eating foods that are pro-inflammatory, eating between meals, eating too much, taxing the digestive system more than it can accommodate, and what happens? You end up with symptoms. Indigestion, constipation, loose stool, diarrhea. These are common symptom patterns. Then the liver gets overloaded. Then the kidney gets overloaded. Then the skin gets overloaded. That's the progression of detoxing. From the gut to the liver to the kidneys to the skin. We haven't gone over the lymphatics yet, but that's not today. How far can I go? Pardon? Okay, thank you. So, careful what you ask for. I go another 8 hours with no problem. I love this stuff. So what happens is this. If you overtax the system and you put more in than the body can accommodate, and aging degrades the system of digestion also, then you support it. But not by taking the symptom away. If you just take the symptom away, it's like having a cancer and putting a Band-Aid over it. Is that going to stop the cancer from growing? Obviously not. All right? You're going to do things to actually clean up the system, support the immune response, deal with the cancer process, deal with cancer stem cell issues that generate continued formation of cancer, and deal with the cancer directly and indirectly, whole body healing. We worked with many, many cancer patients over the decades. And that's another subject, by the way. It's a huge subject. but you're not going to mitigate, you're not going to mask symptoms. So I have a patient right now I'm working with, severe digestive issues, GERD issues for years. She's in a state of panic. She's been seen by 3 different gastroenterologists. I'm not exaggerating. She keeps going back and forth between these people with different medications. Her husband finally said, please just listen to Dr. Saeed. So she finally said, okay, what do you want me to do? I said, thank you for asking. So we're working to actually heal her gut, heal her diet, take out the inflammatory triggers, all the things we've talked about.
When you get ulcers, is that just really bad inflammation?
Well, it's inflammatory also. Ulcers, duodenal ulcers, gastric ulcers, is lack of blood supply also. Now, stress, there's another topic we'll do not today. It's a large topic. Stress causes blood to shunt away from the gut to the musculature. As you do that, you move blood away from the small intestine and stomach, and you make yourself prone to ulcers or ulcerations. Also, the diet plays in significantly to that. But worry, stress, anxiety also contributes to that. Also, insufficient organic sodium in the diet, like in vegetables, especially celery and cucumbers. With ulcers, celery juice and cucumber juice are fantastic, especially celery juice. Organic sodium, which helps the gut heal. Get the stressors out of the diet. Get them out of the life. Okay? Get out and walk and move. Follow the laws of health, as we'll narrate over time further and further. We work with ulcers all the time. Cayenne pepper. I had one friend of mine whose mother was a nurse. She said, she was on the East Coast, I never met her. She says, what can she do? I said, cayenne pepper. She said, say what? Isn't that going to irritate her? I said, no. So she got a low heat cayenne. Within a few weeks, ulcers were gone. Yep. Took it every meal. Every meal. That's right. So, simple things. I mean, really simple things. There's a microphone for you.
Oh, okay. How many meals of good meals, greens, and can we have nuts and whatever? What can we eat, and how many meals should we have a day to keep to an ideal situation?
Great question. So I'll answer that question briefly, and then I'll finish the gut, because I only have like 5 minutes. So ideally, 2 meals a day, unless you're physically very active, then a 3rd meal. Now, here's how that works. You have a cortisol rhythm. Cortisol is made by the adrenal glands. You've heard of cortisol? Some call it the stress hormone. It's much more than that. So you have cortisol that's, here's morning. When you wake up, here's bedtime. So cortisol is high in the morning and lowest at night. Then it comes up slowly at night to the morning level, and you start all over again. When cortisol is the highest is when you digest food most efficiently. It's called a good hearty breakfast. It's called breakfast like a king. Lunchtime, lunch like a queen. We're still able to digest food effectively. Dinner time is a lower level, far lower level of cortisol, dinner like a pauper. I love that adage. Breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, dinner like a pauper. And if you're still hungry. I have some patients that get ravishingly hungry at night, so they have a small dinner as we're stabilizing glucose levels, sugar levels. Now, why is that important? That determines blood sugar to the brain. The brain requires 2 things to function. What are they? Oxygen and glucose. That's it. If sugar's not well regulated and oxygen's not well regulated, what's going to happen to your brain? It's not going to work. As Curtis acknowledged, it's going to go downhill rapidly. It's going to deteriorate, degenerate. You end up with all kinds of brain issues. One of the most common conditions I work with is Parkinson's. We work with it very successfully without drugs, but by supporting levodopa and dopamine in the brain, the substantia nigra of the brainstem. It's a degenerative condition. We see tremors routinely stop, weakness recover. Yeah. The gait improve, etc. But it's nutritional. In fact, we're seeing in the naturopathic world, the nutritional world, research starting to outpace the medical world on many, many conditions now. And it's about time. It's been in the offing for decades, but it's starting to outpace. I take courses many times a year on all this stuff, and I'm watching that happen. Where cardiologists are now starting to come to us to work with them because they can't do the things we can do, as an example. So, 2 meals a day preferred, third if you're still hungry, or you get ravishingly hungry at night, or you work really hard through the day. Now let me come back to the gut. All right, so we want to heal this leaky gut pattern. We take out the pro-inflammatory foods, the flesh foods especially. Sugar, all right, big time. If you're intolerant to gluten, we take that out also. Soy, I don't recommend. These are big things that people tend to consume a lot of, and unfortunately it doesn't work for most people. Now, as we do that, there are certain nutrients that help heal the gut. There's nutrition and there's botanical support. If a person's got a problem with leaky gut, there are certain nutrient combinations we like to use that have like glycine, for example, or marshmallow root, or slippery elm bark, which are demulcents. Teas that work that way, that are very soothing to the gut. We use formulas of different kinds depending on the person's needs. But there's ways of healing it very straightforwardly that are highly nutritive and effective. I'm not going to go to treatment modalities right now. We'll do a whole other section on just that, so you know what to do for yourself at home. Now, so here we are with the small intestine where we left off. That food is being broken down to its smallest components, amino acids from proteins, glucose from carbohydrates, monounderglycerides from fats. That's taken across the gut wall, taken to the liver, and metabolized and sent through the rest of the body. Meanwhile, the rest of the food, especially fiber, is going to be found in the large intestines, in the colon. What do you have mainly in the colon? Bugs, probiotics as they're called. You have bacteria in the colon that are digesting the fibrin, or the fiber, digesting the fiber in the diet and converting that to energy that we take in from the gut. So as you're doing that, you're taking nutrients ultimately until you finally eliminate the waste. Now what happens if you can't eliminate the waste? Constipation. You auto-intoxify. You actually increase toxins back into the system, back through the portal system of veins. So from the small intestine and the large intestine, all that blood supply is going where? To the liver, to be metabolized and used. But if you're uptaking poisons or toxins, they also go to the liver and damage the liver. Now downstream from the liver are the kidneys. So you start damaging the kidneys. I see many, many patients with chronic kidney disease on their way to dialysis. We treat the liver, the kidney recovers. Routinely, not sometimes, all the time. Unless they're stage 5 and they're in dialysis. I've only had one patient like that who refuses to do dialysis. So he's limping along with what we have him do to clean up the liver. So far, so good. He's outlived his prognosis. The kidneys, further downstream, is the skin, the largest organ of the body. It's a route of elimination through the lymphatics. The vascular system is moving all that nutrition and garbage through the entire system to be taken into the cells and out of the cells. The garbage collection system of the vascular system is the lymphatics. The lymphatics take plasma, which becomes tissue fluid, plasma from the blood becomes tissue fluid to get nutrients into the cell. Tissue fluid becomes lymph to be taken up by the lymphatics to be taken back into the vascular system after it's cleansed through the lymph nodes and the spleen. So you have clean blood again. That's the body's garbage collection and vacuuming system, if you will. If the lymphatics are carrying toxins out of the system, they dump them also through the skin. So many rashes, boils, things of this nature, especially rashes, are cleared up when you clean up upstream, the liver and the gut. Routinely.
Is there a specific exercise you can do to clean the lymphatics?
Walk. Walk. So the lymphatics don't have muscles. They require your muscles to function. So we're given the gift of walking. When you walk, the soleus, the muscle, the fat muscle in the back of the calf, not the gastrocs that give you shape with the width of it, the soleus, acts as a sump pump for the lymphatics to get that fluid up to the pelvis. Then you have the pelvic sling that acts further to get the lymphatics to pump up the central channel to get that lymphatic fluid back to the subclavian artery on the right side into the vascular system to be cleansed through the liver. That's how we're designed. So what happens if you're a couch potato? What happens to your ankles? They swell up because the lymphatics are not being supported moving back up, and the venous drainage is not as efficient either. So what do I suggest to my patients? Walk. Another thing that works well with patients who can't, obese, problems with the knees, hips, etc., get on a little rebounder. You've seen those little mini trampolines? Or just do toe raises. Okay? But mini trampolines are great. We have had some patients come to our retreats that are so debilitated they can't even do that. So we put their feet on the trampoline and we trampoline for them to get them to start so the lymphatics start moving, and then eventually they can do it themselves. Start wherever you can.
On the rebounder, what is the motion that works to clean the lymphatics? Is
Up
it
and down.
jumping up or with your foot still on the?
Depends on what you can do. If you're a trampoline artist, you can jump and leave the table. Otherwise, you just go heel toe, heel toe, heel toe, heel toe. Just bounce up and down. And if you get a mini trampoline, get one that's got a good sweet spot. That's not up thud, up thud, up thud. It's up, ah, up, ah. So it eases the up and down movement. The one we have is called the Cellerciser. It's the best one we found. The whole thing's a sweet spot. Cellerciser with a C. Good.